What happens when a billionaire CEO publicly humiliates a disabled janitor by forcing him to play piano at a charity gala, not knowing the janitor is the son of a legendary pianist? "I can't do this," Andre Johnson whispered, his paralyzed left hand trembling as billionaire Marcus Whitmore shoved him toward the grand piano. "Then I suggest you find a way." Whitmore sneered, his voice echoing through the ballroom filled with 300 of the city's wealthiest elite. "Or you can pack your things and leave tonight. No severance, no references, nothing." But what Marcus Whitmore didn't know, what nobody in that glittering ballroom could have imagined, was that the broken man standing before them carried a gift so profound, so extraordinary, that it would shake the very foundations of their privilege and expose the cruelty hiding beneath their charitable smiles. This is a story about hidden talent, unbearable loss, and the moment when everything changed. A story that will remind you never to judge someone's worth by their circumstances. Dear viewer, if you are watching my story for the first time, I humbly request you write the location from where you are watching right now. Subscribe to this channel and press the bell icon now, not to miss the notifications of my daily published new stories. Thank you, and let's dive into the full story. The Whitmore Tower Ballroom sparkled with champagne glasses and diamond jewelry. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in silk, where business moguls and society elites gathered for the annual Whitmore Foundation Charity Gala. The event was the social highlight of the season, where the wealthy gathered to celebrate their generosity while networking over $500 plates of barely touched food. Andre Johnson moved quietly along the edges of the room, emptying trash bins and wiping down surfaces that didn't really need cleaning. At 32 years old, he was tall, but walked with a slight hunch, as if trying to make himself smaller, less noticeable. His left arm hung stiffly at his side, the hand curled inward, a permanent reminder of the accident that had shattered his life 5 years ago. He wore the standard gray janitor uniform with his name embroidered on the chest pocket. Nobody looked at him. To the people in this room, he was invisible, just part of the backdrop, like the catering staff and the floral arrangements. That was fine with Andre. He preferred invisibility. It meant fewer questions, fewer pitying looks, fewer reminders of everything he had lost. Andre's shift was supposed to end at 9, but Marcus Whitmore had insisted all maintenance staff remain until the last guest departed. That meant Andre wouldn't get home until well past midnight, wouldn't get to tuck his 8-year-old daughter Zoe into bed, wouldn't get to read her the bedtime story she loved. His mother was watching Zoe tonight, as she did most nights because Andre worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat. The medical bills never stopped coming. Zoe had been born with a congenital heart condition that required constant monitoring and medication. The accident had taken Andre's wife Sarah, his ability to play piano, and their financial stability all in one terrible night. Now he scraped by on a janitor's salary and weekend shifts at a grocery store, always one emergency away from losing everything. He checked his phone quickly. A text from his mother. "Zoe's asking for you. Told her you'll be home soon. She's being brave, but I can tell she's not feeling well today." Andre's chest tightened. Zoe had been having more bad days lately. The cardiologist had mentioned that she might need surgery sooner than they'd hoped. Surgery that would cost more than Andre made in 3 years, even with insurance. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and returned to his work, pushing his cleaning cart toward the service hallway. That's when it happened. A waiter rushed past him, carrying a tray of champagne, and Andre, lost in worried thoughts about his daughter, didn't step aside fast enough. The waiter collided with his cart, stumbled, and champagne glasses went flying. Time seemed to slow down as Andre watched the crystal flutes arc through the air. Most shattered on the marble floor, but one sailed in a perfect trajectory toward a man in an impeccably tailored tuxedo standing near the stage. Marcus Whitmore, the CEO of Whitmore Industries, the host of this event, and Andre's ultimate employer. The champagne splashed across Whitmore's crisp white shirt and onto his Armani jacket, the amber liquid staining the expensive fabric. The ballroom fell silent. Every conversation stopped. Every eye turned toward them. Marcus Whitmore's face transformed from surprise to fury in an instant. His jaw clenched, his eyes narrowed, and a vein pulsed at his temple. "You clumsy idiot." Whitmore's voice was low and dangerous. He grabbed Andre's good arm with bruising force. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs? More than you make in 6 months? I guarantee it." "Sir, I'm so sorry." Andre began, his voice barely above a whisper. "The waiter, it was an accident. An accident." Whitmore's laugh was harsh and cold. "That's all I ever hear from people like you. Excuses. Incompetence." He looked Andre up and down with undisguised contempt. "Tell me your name." "Andre Johnson, sir." "Well, Andre Johnson, let me tell you something about accidents. In my world, there are no accidents. There are only consequences." He released Andre's arm with a shove. "You're going to learn about consequences tonight." Marcus Whitmore strode to the stage, champagne still dripping from his jacket. He grabbed the microphone from the podium where the evening's program lay waiting. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please." The murmur of conversations died down. 300 faces turned toward the stage expectantly. "We're here tonight to celebrate charity, generosity, and giving back to those less fortunate." Whitmore's smile didn't reach his eyes. "And it seems we have an opportunity to put that spirit into practice right here, right now." He gestured toward Andre, who stood frozen near his overturned cart. "This is Andre Johnson. He's one of our custodial staff here at Whitmore Tower." Andre felt his face burning as hundreds of eyes fixed on him. He wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor. "Andre just had a little accident." Whitmore continued, his tone dripping with false sympathy. "Ruined a $15,000 suit. Now I could fire him on the spot. But that wouldn't be very charitable of me, would it?" Scattered, nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. "But I believe in giving people chances to redeem themselves, to show us what they're really made of." Whitmore walked to the magnificent Steinway grand piano that sat on the stage, used earlier for a brief classical music interlude. He ran his hand along its polished surface. "You see this beautiful instrument? It's worth more than most people make in a decade. Tonight we had a wonderful pianist play for us during dinner." He gestured expansively to the crowd. "And I thought, why not give our friend Andre here a chance to entertain us as well?" The confused murmurs grew louder. Andre's stomach dropped. "Come up here, Andre." Whitmore's voice hardened. "Now." Andre's legs felt like lead as he walked toward the stage. His left arm hung useless at his side. His mind raced, searching for a way out, but he knew there wasn't one. Whitmore had made it clear. Refuse, and he'd be fired immediately. "Please, sir," Andre said quietly, when he reached the stage, his voice not carrying beyond Whitmore's hearing. "I can't play piano. I don't know how." "That's not my problem." Whitmore's smile was cruel. "You see, Andre, people like you need to understand your place in the world. You think you can just bumble around making mistakes that cost people like me time and money without consequences." He raised his voice again for the audience. "Andre is going to play something for us tonight. Let's give him some encouragement." Scattered, uncertain applause filled the room. Some guests looked uncomfortable, others intrigued by the spectacle. "Sir, please." Andre tried again, desperation creeping into his voice. "I have a daughter. She's sick. I need this job. I'll work extra shifts, I'll pay for your suit, just please don't do this. Whitmore leaned in close, his words a harsh whisper. You should have thought about your sick daughter before you decided to be careless. Now sit down at that piano and do anything, or I'll make sure you never work anywhere in this city again. I have connections everywhere, Andre. Everywhere. You'll be lucky to get a job cleaning toilets at a truck stop. The threat hung in the air between them. Andre knew Whitmore had that kind of power. Men like him always did. His hands shaking. Andre walked to the piano bench. The instrument looked enormous, intimidating. He hadn't been this close to a piano in 5 years. Not since the accident. Not since the last time he could use both hands. The bench was too high. When he sat down, his feet barely reached the pedals properly. His left hand rested uselessly in his lap. His right hand hovered over the keys, trembling. The ivory keys seemed to blur before his eyes as tears threatened to spill. In the audience, people whispered behind their hands. Some looked away, embarrassed. Others watched with the fascinated horror of witnessing a car crash in slow motion. As Andre sat frozen before the piano, memories crashed over him like a wave pulling him back through time. Back to when his hands had been whole. Back to when music had been his entire world. He remembered being 4 years old, standing on a stool so he could reach the keys of the old upright piano in their modest apartment. His father, Isaiah Johnson, sat beside him, his large hands gentle as they guided Andre's small fingers to the correct positions. Like this little man. Isaiah's deep voice had been patient and warm. Feel the keys. Don't just press them. Listen to what they're telling you. Every note has a story. Isaiah Johnson had been a legend in their community. Not famous in the way that brought wealth or widespread recognition, but known and revered by everyone who truly understood music. He had performed in small venues, and church concerts had taught piano to dozens of students, and had possessed a gift for making music that brought grown men to tears. But he had never pursued fame. After Andre's mother died, giving birth to Andre, Isaiah had devoted himself entirely to raising his son and sharing his love of music. They had lived simply in a small apartment above a dry cleaner, but to young Andre, it had been a kingdom where music reigned. Your mama loved music, Isaiah would say, on the nights when Andre asked about the mother he'd never known. She had the voice of an angel. Every time you play, she's listening. So make it beautiful for her. And Andre had tried. Oh, how he had tried. By age 6, he could play pieces that challenged teenagers. By 8, he was performing at recitals where audience members would whisper in amazement. By 10, a music professor from the state university had called him a prodigy and offered him a scholarship for when he was old enough to attend. But it wasn't just technical skill. Andre had inherited something deeper from his father, an ability to pour emotion into music to make the piano sing with joy or weep with sorrow. When Andre played, people didn't just hear notes. They felt something profound and true. The memory shifted. Andre was 16 now, standing in the wings of a concert hall. His father sat at the grand piano on stage playing for what would be his final performance. Isaiah had been ill for months, his heart failing, but he had insisted on this one last concert. Andre had watched from the wings as his father played Chopin with such beauty that half the audience wept. But Andre had also seen what others missed, the slight tremor in his father's hands, the way he had to pause between pieces to catch his breath, the grayish pallor of his skin. 3 days later, Isaiah Johnson had died peacefully in his sleep. And 16-year-old Andre had inherited his father's old piano, his collection of sheet music, and a legacy of musical genius that felt like both a blessing and an impossible burden to carry. The memory jumped forward again. Andre, at 17, working as a stock boy during the day and playing piano in a hotel lounge at night, sending himself through community college. Meeting Sarah, a nursing student with warm brown eyes and a laugh that made him forget how tired he was. Falling in love. Getting married in a small ceremony with just a few friends. Sarah getting pregnant. Joy mixing with terror as they struggled to make ends meet. Then Zoe was born tiny and perfect, with her mother's eyes and her father's long fingers. But there were complications. Zoe's heart wasn't formed quite right. Suddenly, there were doctor's appointments, specialists, medications, bills piling up faster than they could manage. Andre had taken extra shifts. Sarah had gone back to work too soon after giving birth. They had pawned Isaiah's piano, the thing Andre loved most in the world besides his family, to pay for Zoe's first surgery. Andre had stopped performing, stopped teaching the few piano students he'd had. There wasn't time. There was only work and worry and loving his daughter through every difficult day. The final memory rose up, the one Andre had tried so hard to suppress. 5 years ago, driving home late at night after a double shift. Sarah beside him, also exhausted from her 12-hour nursing shift. They were talking about Zoe, about how much better she'd been doing lately, about maybe being able to afford a small house someday. Andre had seen the headlights coming too late. The drunk driver had crossed the center line at 70 miles per hour. Andre had tried to swerve. He remembered the squeal of tires, Sarah's scream, the sickening crunch of metal, and then darkness. He had woken up in a hospital 3 days later. His mother was sitting beside his bed, her face drawn with grief. The doctors told him about his injuries. Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, a traumatic brain injury that had required surgery, and nerve damage to his left arm so severe that it was permanently paralyzed. But none of that had mattered compared to the other news. Sarah hadn't made it. She had died on impact, they said. She hadn't suffered. As if that made it better. As if anything could make it better. Andre had spent 6 months in physical therapy learning to manage with one functional hand. He'd sold everything of value they owned to pay the medical bills. He'd moved back in with his mother because he couldn't afford rent. And he had vowed never to touch a piano again, because music without Sarah, music without 2 hands, felt like a betrayal of everything he'd lost. Andre blinked, the memories receding, pulling him back to the present moment. He was sitting at the piano in the Whitmore Tower ballroom, 300 people watching him, waiting for him to humiliate himself for their entertainment. His right hand still hovered over the keys. His left hand lay motionless in his lap. Behind him, he could feel Marcus Whitmore's presence, the man's satisfaction at having engineered this moment of degradation. Andre thought about standing up and walking away, about maintaining his dignity even if it cost him his job. But then his phone buzzed in his pocket, a reminder. Zoe, his little girl who needed medication that cost $600 a month, who needed regular cardiology appointments at $200 each, who might need surgery that would cost more than Andre could earn in years. He couldn't afford dignity. He couldn't afford pride. He could only afford to survive, to keep working, to keep his daughter alive. Slowly, Andre placed his right hand on the keys. The ivory felt cool and smooth under his fingertips, familiar, despite the years away. His left hand twitched uselessly in his lap, as if trying to remember what it once could do. From the audience, someone laughed. A short, sharp bark of amusement quickly stifled. But others followed. Whispers and giggles spreading through the crowd like a disease. "Look at him," someone murmured loudly enough to carry. "This is ridiculous." "Poor man," a woman said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "He obviously has no idea what he's doing." Marcus Whitmore spoke into the microphone, his voice jovial and cruel. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the Whitmore Towers concert pianist." More laughter, less restrained now. Andre closed his eyes. In his mind, he heard his father's voice. "Every note has a story, little man. What story are you going to tell? What story indeed? The story of a broken man, the story of loss and defeat, or something else?" Andre's fingers pressed down, and a single note rang out. Middle C, pure and clear. The laughter in the audience faltered slightly. He pressed another key. E, then G. The beginning of a C major triad, the most basic chord in music. But something strange was happening. As his fingers moved across the keys, muscle memory, decades old, began to wake up. His right hand remembered patterns it had played 10,000 times. Scales and arpeggios, chord progressions. His hand knew these things even if his conscious mind had tried to forget. He played a simple melody, something his father had taught him when he was very young. A folk song, humble and sweet. His right hand carried the melody while his left hand remained still. It sounded incomplete, broken, like a conversation with half the words missing. But it was music. Real music, not just random noise. The laughter in the audience died away, replaced by confused silence. Andre's eyes were still closed. He wasn't playing for these people anymore. He was playing for Zoe, for Sarah, for his father. He was playing because even broken, even incomplete music was still part of him. It had always been part of him. The simple melody ended. Andre opened his eyes and lifted his hand from the keys. The ballroom was silent. 300 people stared at him with expressions ranging from surprise to discomfort. Marcus Whitmore's smile had frozen on his face. This wasn't what he'd expected. He'd anticipated complete failure, not even this modest display of actual ability. "Well," Whitmore said, recovering quickly, his voice sharp. "That was interesting. A child's melody played with one hand. I'm sure we're all very impressed." His sarcasm drew nervous chuckles from the crowd. "Though I suppose for someone in your position, Andre, even that much is an achievement." Andre stood up from the bench, his legs unsteady. He'd done what was asked. Surely that was enough. But Whitmore wasn't finished. "You know what, Andre, I'm feeling generous tonight. After all, this is a charity event. How about we make this interesting?" He pulled out his phone and tapped at the screen. "I'm going to play a piece of music for you. A real piece. And you're going to try to play it back for us. If you can, I'll forget about the suit. I might even give you a bonus." Andre's mouth went dry. Play back a piece he'd only heard once. With one hand. That was impossible. Unless, of course, Whitmore continued, you'd rather just collect your final paycheck and leave. The threat was clear. Try and fail spectacularly or give up and lose everything. Andre looked out at the audience. Most faces showed either pity or cruel anticipation, but here and there he saw something else. A few people looked uncomfortable, even disgusted by Whitmore's behavior. An elderly woman in the third row shook her head sadly. A middle-aged man near the back looked angry. And in the very back of the room, partially hidden by a column, Andre noticed someone he hadn't seen earlier. A tall woman with silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun. She wore a simple black dress that somehow made her stand out among all the glittering designer gowns. She was staring at Andre with an intensity that made his breath catch. There was something familiar about her face, though he couldn't place it. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving him. Whitmore had started playing something on his phone. A piano piece complex and beautiful flowed through the ballroom's sound system. Andre recognized it immediately, and his heart nearly stopped. It was one of his father's signature pieces, a sonata by Beethoven that Isaiah Johnson had been famous for performing a piece he'd played at every major concert. The piece he'd taught Andre when Andre was 12 years old. Of all the pieces Whitmore could have chosen, why this one? Was it coincidence, or did Whitmore somehow know about the connection? The music played for 45 seconds. Then Whitmore stopped it. There. That should be simple enough. Yes, just play back what you heard. Andre walked back to the piano bench like a man in a dream. His hands were no longer shaking. A strange calm had settled over him, the calm that comes when you've accepted the inevitable. He sat down and placed his right hand on the keys. His left hand rested in his lap, useless, but somehow not as heavy as before. In his mind, he heard his father's voice again. You don't just memorize the notes, little man. You memorize the feeling, the emotion. If you can remember how it makes you feel, your hands will remember what to play. Andre closed his eyes and let the memory of the music wash over him. He heard it not as Whitmore's phone had played it, but as his father had played it 20 years ago. He felt the joy in the opening measures, the melancholy in the middle section, the triumph in the conclusion. His right hand began to move, the opening phrase delicate and precise. His fingers found the notes as if guided by something beyond conscious thought. Muscle memory from thousands of hours of practice. Genetic memory inherited from a father who had breathed music like air. But playing with one hand was fundamentally different from playing with two. The bass notes that should have been played by his left hand were missing. The harmonies were incomplete. Andre compensated instinctively, playing some of the bass notes with his right hand between melody notes, creating a technique that was unorthodox but effective. His right foot worked the damper pedal, using it more actively than traditional technique would dictate, creating sustain and resonance that filled in some of what the missing left hand left empty. It was like solving a complex puzzle in real time, rearranging the piece to fit his limitations while maintaining its essential character. The music flowed from the piano, imperfect, but undeniably beautiful. Andre's right hand danced across the keys with increasing confidence, playing runs and arpeggios that should have been impossible for a janitor with no formal training for a man who hadn't touched a piano in 5 years. In the audience, the atmosphere changed dramatically. The cruel anticipation evaporated. People leaned forward in their seats. Whispers of surprise spread through the crowd. "Wait, that's actually good," someone murmured. "How is he doing that with one hand?" another voice asked, genuinely amazed. Marcus Whitmore's smile had completely vanished. He stood at the edge of the stage, his expression shifting from confidence to confusion to something that might have been alarm. Andre continued playing, losing himself in the music. Memories flooded through him as his fingers moved. He remembered his father sitting beside him during lessons, patient and encouraging. He remembered Sarah listening from their tiny kitchen while he practiced calling out that she loved that part when he played something particularly beautiful. He remembered playing lullabies for baby Zoe, watching her tiny face relax as she drifted to sleep. Tears rolled down Andre's cheeks, but he didn't stop playing. The music carried all of it. The love and the loss, the grief and the endurance, the broken pieces of a life, somehow still creating something beautiful. As he approached the final measures, Andre made a choice. Instead of playing the triumphant ending his father had always performed, he modified it. He slowed the tempo, softened the dynamics, and transformed the ending into something gentler, more resigned. A tribute to survival rather than victory. The final note hung in the air, sustained by the pedal gradually fading into silence. Andre lifted his hand from the keys and opened his eyes. For a moment, he had forgotten where he was. The present rushed back. The ballroom. The audience. Marcus Whitmore. The silence lasted perhaps 3 seconds, though it felt like an eternity. Then someone began to clap. Slow, deliberate applause from the back of the room. The silver-haired woman Andre had noticed earlier was on her feet, her hands coming together with measured dignity. Others joined in. First a handful, then dozens. Then the entire audience rose in a standing ovation. The applause built and built, filling the ornate ballroom with sound that had nothing to do with mockery and everything to do with genuine appreciation. Andre sat frozen at the piano, overwhelmed. This wasn't supposed to happen. He was supposed to fail to be humiliated, to slink away in shame. Instead, 300 of the city's elite were applauding him, some with tears in their eyes. The silver-haired woman began walking toward the stage, moving with purpose through the crowd. People parted to let her pass, and Andre noticed several audience members nodding to her with clear respect. Whoever she was, she commanded authority here. She climbed the stairs to the stage, ignoring Marcus Whitmore completely, and approached Andre. Up close, he could see she was probably in her late 60s, with kind eyes and a face that might once have been very beautiful. She smiled at him, and suddenly Andre knew exactly who she was. "Hello, Andre," she said, her voice rich and warm. "You probably don't remember me. The last time I saw you, you were just 16 years old at your father's funeral. I'm Professor Elena Martinez. I taught with your father at the community music program." The memories clicked into place. Yes, Andre did remember her vaguely. She had been one of the people who spoke at Isaiah's funeral, talking about what a gifted teacher and musician he had been. Professor Martinez turned to address the audience, taking the microphone from a stunned Marcus Whitmore. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need to explain something. This man you just heard play Andre Johnson. He is not simply a janitor who got lucky. He is the son of Isaiah Johnson, one of the most talented pianists this city has ever known." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the crowd. Some of the older guests nodded in recognition of Isaiah's name. Professor Martinez continued, her voice growing more passionate. "Isaiah Johnson was my colleague and my dear friend. He had opportunities to perform internationally, to record albums, to become famous. But he chose instead to stay here to teach music to children in underserved communities, to share his gift freely with anyone who wanted to learn. He raised his son alone after his wife died, and he taught Andre everything he knew." She turned to look at Andre, her eyes glistening. Andre Johnson was a prodigy. By age 10, he was better than students twice his age. By 16, he had been offered a full scholarship to study music at the conservatory. But when Isaiah died, Andre gave up music to support himself. And then 5 years ago, he was in a terrible accident that took his wife and paralyzed his left arm. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. "What you just witnessed," Professor Martinez said, her voice thick with emotion, "was a man who hasn't touched a piano in 5 years, who has only one functional hand, who was forced onto this stage as a form of humiliation, playing one of the most difficult piano pieces in the classical repertoire from memory, adapted in real time to accommodate his disability. That wasn't luck or a party trick. That was genius. Pure, undeniable genius." She looked directly at Marcus Whitmore, her expression hardening. And it was nearly destroyed tonight by cruelty masquerading as entertainment. The ballroom erupted in a chaos of voices. Some people applauded Professor Martinez's words. Others looked at Marcus Whitmore with expressions ranging from disappointment to disgust. Whitmore himself stood frozen, his face cycling through shock, anger, and something that might have been fear. Professor Martinez helped Andre stand up from the piano bench. His legs were shaky, his mind reeling from everything that had just happened. She squeezed his shoulder gently. "I'm so sorry for what you've been through, Andre. Your father would be so proud of you." Before Andre could respond, Marcus Whitmore stepped forward, recovering some of his composure. "Professor Martinez, with all due respect, this is my event, and..." "With all due respect," Professor Martinez interrupted coldly, "you turned this event into a circus. You humiliated a disabled man in front of 300 people for your own amusement. Whatever point you thought you were making, it backfired spectacularly." Whitmore's jaw clenched. "I think you're being dramatic. It was just a bit of fun. Andre clearly has some skill, and fun." The word came from the audience. A distinguished-looking man in his 70s stood up, leaning on a cane. His formal military dress uniform was decorated with medals. "I'm Major General William Morrison, retired, and I don't find anything fun about watching a powerful man abuse his position to humiliate someone with a disability." Other voices joined in. A woman in an elegant red dress stood. "I'm Sandra Chen, CEO of Chen Technologies. I've donated substantial amounts to the Whitmore Foundation over the years, but after tonight I'll be redirecting those donations elsewhere." More people stood. A prominent surgeon, a federal judge, a university president. One by one, they voiced their disapproval of Whitmore's behavior. The social and business elite who had come to celebrate philanthropy were turning against their host. Marcus Whitmore's face had gone pale. "This is ridiculous. You're all overreacting." He gestured dismissively at Andre. "Is an employee who made a mistake. I was simply what Professor Martinez challenged, teaching him a lesson, putting him in his place." She shook her head sadly. "Marcus, do you even realize who Andre's father was? Some nobody musician," Whitmore snapped. "I don't see what that has to do with. Isaiah Johnson was not a nobody." Professor Martinez's voice was sharp as a blade. "And you know it. You know exactly who he was." The ballroom fell silent again. Everyone sensed something significant was about to be revealed. Professor Martinez looked at Whitmore with an expression that mixed pity and contempt. "Shall I tell them, Marcus? Or would you like to explain why you chose that particular piece of music for Andre to play? Why you specifically selected Isaiah Johnson's signature sonata?" Whitmore said nothing, but a muscle jumped in his jaw. Professor Martinez turned to address the audience. 35 years ago, there was a prestigious piano competition held in this city. The Stein-Hart competition, one of the most important classical music competitions in the region. 2 young men were the finalists, both incredibly talented. One was Isaiah Johnson, a scholarship student from a working-class family. The other was Richard Whitmore, son of the wealthy Whitmore family with every advantage money could buy. Andre's breath caught. Richard Whitmore, Marcus's father. He watched as the CEO's face grew increasingly rigid. "Isaiah won that competition," Professor Martinez continued. "His performance was transcendent. The judges were unanimous. Richard Whitmore came in second place, and by all accounts, he never recovered from that loss. He had been told his entire life that he was special, that money and privilege would guarantee him success. Losing to someone he considered beneath him shattered something in Richard." She looked at Marcus with sad understanding. "Your father spent the rest of his life bitter about that competition, didn't he? Marcus, I remember him at community events always mentioning that he should have won, that the judges were biased, that Isaiah had somehow cheated. Richard Whitmore built a business empire and made hundreds of millions of dollars, but he never got over losing to Isaiah Johnson. Marcus's hands had curled into fists at his sides. "You have no right to bring my father into this." "Your father died 5 years ago," Professor Martinez said gently. "But you inherited his resentment, didn't you? When you found out that the janitor working in your building was Isaiah Johnson's son, you couldn't resist the opportunity to humiliate him to get some kind of revenge for a slight that happened decades before you were born. That's not..." Whitmore started, then stopped. His shoulders sagged slightly. "So, what if I knew who he was? That doesn't change the fact that he's just a janitor who ruined my suit. Just a janitor." Andre finally found his voice quiet but steady. He looked at Marcus Whitmore directly for the first time. "You're right. I am just a janitor. I clean your building every night. I empty your trash and mop your floors. And there's no shame in that. I do honest work to support my daughter." He took a breath, years of suppressed emotion rising to the surface. "But you, Mr. Whitmore, you tried to make me feel small because of what I do, because of my disability, because I'm not wealthy and powerful like you. You wanted to humiliate me in front of all these people because your father couldn't beat my father at something that mattered to him." Andre gestured to the piano. "My father taught me that music is a gift, not something to be hoarded or used as a weapon. He shared it freely with everyone, regardless of whether they could pay him. He found more joy in teaching one child to play chopsticks than your father probably found in his entire career of chasing recognition he thought he deserved." The audience was transfixed. Andre's voice grew stronger. "I gave up music because life forced me to, because my daughter needed medicine more than I needed to perform, because keeping my family alive mattered more than keeping my talent sharp. I'm not ashamed of the choices I made. I'd make them again." He looked around the ballroom at the 300 faces watching him. "But I am ashamed that we live in a world where a man like you, Mr. Whitmore, has so much power and uses it so poorly. Where you can publicly humiliate someone just because you can. Where a person's worth is measured by their bank account instead of their character." Marcus Whitmore's face had gone from pale to flushed. Multiple expressions warred across his features. Anger, embarrassment, something that might have been shame. But before he could respond, another voice rang out from the audience. "I think we've all seen quite enough." An elegant woman in her 70s rose from a front row seat. She wore a string of pearls that probably cost more than Andre made in a decade, and her white hair was styled in a perfect updo. "I'm Catherine Reynolds. For those who don't know, my late husband founded the Reynolds Foundation, and I currently sit on the board of 6 major charitable organizations in this city." She looked at Marcus Whitmore with cold disapproval. "Marcus, your behavior tonight has been reprehensible, using your position to demean and humiliate a disabled employee, forcing him to perform like a trained animal for your entertainment. This is not what charity looks like. This is not what leadership looks like." Mrs. Reynolds turned to Andre, her expression softening. "Young man, you have demonstrated more grace and dignity tonight than anyone else in this room, including myself, I'm ashamed to say. We all sat here and watched while you were being humiliated, and none of us spoke up until it was almost over." She opened her purse and pulled out a business card, walking to the stage to hand it to Andre. "I want you to call my office tomorrow. I understand your daughter has medical needs. The Reynolds Foundation will cover her treatment costs, whatever they may be." Andre stared at the card, unable to process what he was hearing. "Mrs. Reynolds, I can't. That's too much." "Nonsense." Mrs. Reynolds waved away his protest. "It's not nearly enough to make up for what you've endured tonight, but it's a start." She looked back at the audience. "And I'm certain others here will want to help as well. After all, we came here to be charitable, didn't we?" Marcus Whitmore stood at the edge of the stage, watching his carefully constructed evening crumble around him. The guests were murmuring among themselves, many of them looking at him with expressions of disappointment or outright disgust. Board members and business partners were avoiding his gaze. His social standing was taking damage he might never fully repair. He should cut his losses, apologize gracefully, and try to salvage what he could. That would be the smart play. But pride, that damned family pride that had been his father's curse and was now his own, wouldn't let him back down. "You all think you understand what happened here tonight?" Marcus said, his voice hard. "You think this is about me being cruel to a poor, disabled janitor? You think Professor Martinez's little story explains everything, but you don't know the full truth." Professor Martinez frowned. "Marcus, don't make this worse." "Worse? How could it be worse?" Whitmore laughed bitterly. "My reputation is already destroyed, apparently, so let me at least tell my side of the story." He turned to face Andre directly. "You want to know why I resented your father? It wasn't just about one competition." Andre said nothing, waiting. "My father, Richard Whitmore, spent his entire childhood preparing for a career as a concert pianist. It was his passion, his dream. He practiced 8 hours a day. He gave up a normal childhood to pursue excellence, and he was excellent, truly exceptional." Marcus's voice took on an edge of old pain. But when the Steinhardt competition came around, the judges chose Isaiah Johnson, a self-taught musician who had never had a proper lesson from a conservatory professor, someone who played by instinct rather than formal technique. The judges called him raw and authentic and emotionally powerful. They said my father's playing was technically perfect, but soulless. Professor Martinez started to speak, but Marcus raised a hand. "I'm not finished." After that competition, doors that should have opened for my father stayed closed. People remembered him as the one who lost to the prodigy. He got a few small performance opportunities, but the career he'd worked his entire life for never materialized. Eventually, he had to give up music entirely and go into business to support his family. "So yes," Whitmore continued, "my father was bitter. He felt like his years of disciplined training had been dismissed in favor of someone's natural talent. He felt like hard work and dedication had lost to mere genetic luck. And maybe he taught me to see it that way too." He looked at Andre with something that wasn't quite hatred, but wasn't far from it either. "When I found out who you were, when I learned that Isaiah Johnson's son was working as a janitor in my building, I'll admit it felt like cosmic justice. The great prodigy's son reduced to mopping floors. It seemed fitting." "That's a terrible way to think," Professor Martinez said sadly. "Maybe." Whitmore's jaw tightened. "But then I saw how you managed it. Working 2 jobs, raising a sick daughter alone. Never complaining, never asking for special treatment, never once mentioning who your father was or what you'd given up. And it made me angrier." "Why?" Andre asked quietly. "Because you didn't act defeated." Marcus's voice rose. "You were supposed to be broken. You were supposed to be a cautionary tale about what happens when you rely on talent instead of building practical skills. But instead you just kept going. You accepted your circumstances and did what had to be done without making a spectacle of your suffering." He turned to address the audience again. "You all think I'm a monster for what I did tonight. Maybe I am. But I forced Andre onto that stage because I wanted to prove something. I wanted to show that natural talent doesn't matter without opportunity and privilege. That being gifted means nothing if you can't afford to develop that gift." Marcus looked back at Andre. "I wanted you to fail in front of everyone. To prove that my father was right, that discipline and training matter more than raw ability. But instead you played beautifully. After 5 years away from music, with only one hand, under the worst possible circumstances, you still played beautifully." The admission seemed to cost Marcus something. His shoulders sagged. My father practiced 8 hours a day for 20 years, and never played with the emotion you put into those few minutes. I've taken piano lessons since I was 5, and I couldn't do what you just did. Nobody in this room could. That's what makes it so unbearable. There was silence for a long moment. Then Andre spoke, his voice calm. Mr. Whitmore, I'm sorry your father's dreams didn't work out the way he hoped. I really am. But my father didn't steal anything from yours. He just played music the way he felt it, and the judges preferred that approach. That's not a conspiracy. That's just how it happened. Andre took a step closer to Marcus. And you're wrong about talent not mattering without privilege. Yes, privilege helps. Yes, opportunity matters. I'd give anything to have been able to pursue music professionally, to have had the advantages your father had. But I didn't. Life took me in a different direction. He gestured to the piano. But the music was still there, waiting inside me. That's what talent is. It doesn't disappear just because it's not cultivated. It doesn't fade just because circumstances push it aside. It's part of who you are. My father taught me that. Music isn't something you do. It's something you are. Marcus Whitmore stared at Andre for a long moment, conflicting emotions playing across his face. Finally, he said very quietly, I envy you that. I've taken lessons all my life, and I've never felt that way about music. For me, it was always about winning, about being better than others, about proving something. He laughed softly without humor. My father's curse lives on. Professor Martinez spoke gently. It's not too late to change, Marcus, to find something you love for its own sake, rather than as a competition. Perhaps. Whitmore straightened his shoulders, some of his composure returning. But it is too late for tonight. He looked around the ballroom at his guests. I think this event is over. Thank you all for coming. Your charitable donations will be honored, though I suspect many of you will want to redirect them elsewhere after this evening. He turned to Andre one more time. I won't apologize for who I am or what my father taught me to believe. But I will say this, you played well tonight. Exceptionally well. That probably means very little coming from me, but it's the truth. With that, Marcus Whitmore walked off the stage and out of the ballroom, leaving a shocked silence in his wake. The audience sat in stunned quiet, processing everything they'd witnessed. Professor Martinez was the first to speak, turning to the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I know this evening has been unexpectedly dramatic. Perhaps we should take a brief intermission to... Wait. The single word cut through the murmur of voices. Marcus Whitmore had stopped at the ballroom doors. He turned back, and something in his expression had changed. The defensive anger was gone, replaced by something harder to read. Resignation, perhaps, or determination. He walked back toward the stage with purposeful strides. The audience watched in confusion as he returned to the microphone. I was going to leave. Probably the smart thing to do. Cut my losses and try to rebuild my reputation somewhere down the line. But I realized something just now. Whitmore looked directly at Andre. I've spent my entire life hearing about natural talent, about genius that can't be taught, about how some people are just born with gifts that others can never achieve no matter how hard they work. And I've hated that narrative because it made my father's failure seem inevitable. If Isaiah Johnson was simply more talented, then Richard Whitmore was doomed from the start. He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. But standing here tonight watching you play, I realized I've never actually put that theory to the test. Not really. So I'm going to do something impulsive and probably very stupid. Marcus pulled out his phone again. Professor Martinez tensed, clearly worried about what might come next. Andre Whitmore said, his voice taking on a strange mix of challenge and desperation. You played one of my father's pieces, one he worked on for months to perfect. You played it with one hand from memory after hearing it once. That was impressive, genuinely impressive. He tapped at his phone screen. "But I want to see what you can really do. Not just replay something you already knew from your childhood. I want to test whether your talent is as remarkable as everyone seems to think." "What are you proposing?" Professor Martinez asked sharply. "A challenge." Whitmore's eyes never left Andre. "A real one. I'm going to play a piece of music you've never heard before. Something obscure that wasn't in your father's repertoire. You'll listen to it once, just once, and then you'll attempt to play it back, with one hand under pressure in front of all these people." The audience erupted in concerned murmurs. This was clearly another attempt to humiliate Andre, to set him up for public failure. "And what happens when he can't play this mystery piece perfectly?" Professor Martinez demanded. "What's the point of this exercise?" Marcus Whitmore finally looked away from Andre to address Professor Martinez and the crowd. "If he fails, nothing changes. The evening ends as it would have anyway. I'm already the villain here. But if he succeeds, if he can actually do what I'm describing, then I'll admit that natural talent really does exist in a way that transcends training and opportunity." He turned back to Andre. "And more than that, I'll establish a scholarship fund, the Isaiah Johnson Memorial Scholarship, dedicated to finding and supporting musically gifted young people from underprivileged backgrounds. $1 million to start, with annual funding to follow." The crowd gasped. $1 million was a staggering amount. "But there's one more condition," Whitmore continued. "If you attempt this and succeed, I will also personally fund your daughter's medical care. All of it. Whatever surgeries she needs, whatever treatments, whatever medications. I'll set up a trust to ensure she's taken care of for life." Andre's breath caught. Everything he'd been struggling for, everything that kept him working 2 jobs and sacrificing his dignity, being offered in a single moment. It seemed impossible, too good to be true. "And if I try and fail?" Andre asked, his voice hoarse. Whitmore's expression softened slightly. Maybe the first genuine human emotion Andre had seen from him all night. "If you fail, I'll still cover your daughter's current medical bills, as a gesture of apology for tonight's behavior. But the scholarship fund won't happen, and there won't be a long-term trust for your daughter." Professor Martinez stepped between them. "This is coercive, Marcus. Andre doesn't need to prove anything to you or anyone else. Mrs. Reynolds has already offered to help with medical expenses. He doesn't have to perform like a circus animal for your entertainment." "You're right," Whitmore agreed. "He doesn't have to do anything. This is entirely his choice." He looked at Andre. "I know I have no right to ask this of you after what I put you through earlier. I know this looks like another attempt to humiliate you. Maybe part of it is. I'm not going to lie and pretend I've suddenly become a better person in the last 10 minutes." He paused. "But I'm also genuinely curious. I need to know if what I just witnessed was a fluke muscle memory from childhood, or if you really possess the kind of transcendent ability that people claimed your father had. I need to know if talent like that actually exists, or if it's just a romantic myth we tell ourselves." Andre stood at the piano, his mind racing. This was insane. He'd already pushed his limits tonight, playing a piece from his past that his hands remembered. But a completely new piece. Something complex enough that Whitmore thought it would be a fair test, with only one functional hand. He thought about Zoe, about her upcoming doctor's appointment, where they'd discuss surgery timing, about the mountain of medical debt that already crushed him and would only grow worse, about the possibility of actual security of a trust fund that would protect his daughter even if something happened to him. But he also thought about what Professor Martinez had said, about not being a circus animal, about maintaining dignity, about not letting Marcus Whitmore turn him into a spectacle again, even if this time there was a reward attached. "Mr. Whitmore," Andre said slowly, Why does this matter so much to you? Why do you need this answer so badly?" Whitmore was quiet for a moment. Then he said very softly, "Because my father died believing he'd been cheated out of his dreams by an unfair world. He died bitter and resentful, convinced that hard work didn't matter if someone else was born with a gift you could never match. And I've spent my whole life angry on his behalf." He looked at the piano. But maybe he was wrong. Maybe he just wasn't as talented as he thought he was. And that's a hard truth, but not an unfair one. Maybe the world isn't designed to crush dreams. Maybe some people really are just exceptional, and that's okay. That's even beautiful in a way. He met Andre's eyes. "I need to know which version is true." Andre understood then. This wasn't really about him at all. It was about a son trying to make peace with his father's legacy, trying to understand whether Richard Whitmore had been a victim of circumstances or simply not as special as he'd believed himself to be. "What's the piece?" Andre asked. Whitmore looked surprised that Andre was actually considering it. "Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. The second movement. I'll play 3 minutes of it." His expression was grave. "It's considered one of the most beautiful and technically demanding pieces ever written. Your father never performed it publicly, as far as I know, and it requires extraordinary skill in both hands to play properly." Andre knew the piece had heard it performed, but never attempted to learn it himself. Rachmaninoff had written it to be nearly impossible, a showcase of virtuosity that challenged even the greatest pianists. Playing it with 2 hands was difficult. With 1 hand, it might literally be impossible. "How much time do I get to prepare after hearing it?" Andre asked. Whitmore shook his head. "No preparation time. You hear it, then you play. That's the test. Natural ability versus studied technique." The crowd began protesting again. This was too harsh, too unfair. Even some of Marcus's earlier supporters looked uncomfortable, but Andre raised his good hand for silence. "I'll do it, under one condition." "Name it," Whitmore said. "Win or fail, you apologize to me, publicly. Not for making me play tonight, although you should, but for treating me as less than human because of my job and my disability. For using your power to make me feel small. That's what I want from you. Acknowledgement that how you treated me was wrong regardless of how this challenge turns out." Whitmore's jaw tightened. "You want me to humiliate myself?" "No." Andre's voice was steady. "I want you to recognize that I'm a human being who deserves respect. That's not humiliation. That's basic decency." For a long moment, Marcus Whitmore said nothing. The ballroom held its breath. Finally, he nodded. "Agreed. After you play regardless of the outcome, I will apologize for my behavior tonight and acknowledge that I was wrong to treat you the way I did." "Then play your piece," Andre said. "Let's see what happens." Marcus Whitmore pulled up the recording on his phone and connected it to the ballroom's sound system. The opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the elegant space. The piece began softly, hauntingly beautiful, a melody that seemed to capture both profound sadness and desperate hope. Andre closed his eyes and listened, really listened with every fiber of his being. He let the music wash over him, not trying to memorize individual notes, but absorbing the emotional arc, the harmonic structure, the way the melodies wove together and supported each other. His father had taught him to listen this way. "Don't chase the notes, little man. Chase the feeling. The structure will reveal itself if you understand what the composer was trying to express." The 3 minutes passed in what felt like both an instant and an eternity. When the music stopped, the ballroom remained silent. 300 people waited to see what would happen next. Andre opened his eyes and found Professor Martinez standing beside him. She put a hand on his shoulder and leaned in to whisper. "You don't have to do this, Andre. You've already proven yourself tonight. No one here will think less of you if you walk away." "I know," Andre whispered back. But I think I need to do this. Not for Whitmore. For me. To see if the gift my father gave me is still there after all these years. She squeezed his shoulder gently. Your father would understand, but he'd also want you to know that you're already enough exactly as you are, whether you can play this piece or not. Thank you, Professor. Andre walked to the piano and sat down. He flexed his right hand, working out the tension. His left hand rested in his lap, and for the first time all night, he didn't feel ashamed of it. It was simply part of who he was now. A mark of survival, not failure. Before he began, Andre looked out at the audience and noticed something he hadn't before. Near the back of the room, partially hidden behind a pillar, a small crowd had gathered. They weren't wealthy patrons in evening wear. They were working people janitors and waitstaff and kitchen workers who had heard the commotion and crept in to see what was happening. Among them, Andre spotted Miguel, another custodian who worked the night shift with him. And there was Tamara, the single mother, who cleaned offices on the 10th floor and always asked about Zoe's health. And Jerome, the elderly security guard, who sometimes shared his dinner with Andre when shifts ran late. They were watching him with hope and pride on their faces. Not because they cared about classical music or understood what he was attempting, but because he was one of them, and he was being given a moment to show that they mattered too. That the people who cleaned the buildings and served the food and kept the city running in invisible ways had value and dignity, and sometimes even greatness within them. Andre took a breath and placed his right hand on the keys. For Zoe, for his father, for Sarah. For every person who'd ever been dismissed or overlooked or told they didn't matter. The first notes emerged from the piano, soft and tentative. The opening melody of Rachmaninoff's second movement, one of the most achingly beautiful themes ever composed. Andre's right hand found the notes, his muscle memory and musical intuition guiding him. But this wasn't like playing the Beethoven piece. That had been something he'd known since childhood, something his hands remembered automatically. This was different. He was constructing the music in real time, holding the sound of Whitmore's recording in his mind while simultaneously translating it into physical movement. His right hand had to do the work of two hands. When the melody line called for accompaniment, he had to choose which notes were essential and which could be omitted. When the bass line demanded attention, he had to quickly drop down to play those notes, then jump back up to continue the melody. It was like solving a complex puzzle while running a marathon while performing surgery. Every second required intense concentration and split-second decision-making. But something miraculous was happening. As Andre played, he fell into a state of flow, that rare mental state where time seems to stop, and conscious thought gives way to pure instinct. His right hand moved across the keys with increasing confidence, finding solutions to problems before his conscious mind could articulate what the problems were. He used the sustain pedal aggressively, holding notes longer than standard technique would dictate, creating layers of sound that filled in the gaps left by his missing left hand. He played some notes staccato to create rhythmic drive, others with a singing legato to emphasize the melodic line. He bent the tempo, slowing down in moments where he needed to navigate particularly complex passages, then accelerating to build tension and momentum. It wasn't perfect. It couldn't be perfect. There were notes that should have been played but weren't. Harmonies that should have been richer but remained incomplete. The professional pianists in the audience would hear every gap, every compromise, every moment where the music was diminished by the limitations of a single hand. But what Andre was playing was also undeniably beautiful. He wasn't just mechanically reproducing the notes he'd heard. He was interpreting them, shaping them, pouring his own emotion and experience into Rachmaninoff's framework. The sadness in the melody became his grief for Sarah. The yearning became his desperate love for Zoe. The moments of hope became his refusal to give up despite everything life had thrown at him. Tears rolled down Andre's face as he played, but he didn't stop. His right hand flew across the keys, and somewhere in the back of his mind, he could feel his left hand moving too. Not physically, of course. The paralyzed muscles remained still. But in his imagination, in the mental space where music lived, his left hand was there playing all the notes that had to be left silent in reality. As he approached the final minute of the piece, Andre made a choice. The original recording had ended with a return to the opening theme, soft and contemplative. But Andre sensed he could push further. He began to build the dynamics, playing louder, using the full range of the keyboard. The melody that had been melancholy transformed into something more powerful. Not triumphant exactly, but resilient, defiant even. "This is who I am," the music seemed to say. Broken, but not defeated. Diminished, but not destroyed. Still here, still capable of beauty, still worthy of love and respect and dignity. The final notes rang out, sustained by the pedal filling every corner of the vast ballroom. Andre lifted his hand from the keys and sat perfectly still, his eyes closed, his face wet with tears. The silence lasted perhaps 5 seconds. Then someone in the back of the room, one of the working people who had gathered to watch, began to clap. Slowly at first, then faster. Others joined in. Then everyone was on their feet, applauding thunderously. Some people were crying. Others were shaking their heads in amazement. In the front row, Catherine Reynolds had both hands pressed to her heart, tears streaming down her elegant face. Beside her, the retired general was applauding with fierce pride, his expression stern, but his eyes bright. Professor Martinez climbed onto the stage and embraced Andre, holding him tight. "Extraordinary," she whispered. "Your father is dancing in heaven right now, Andre. I promise you that." Andre couldn't speak. His emotions were too raw, too overwhelming. He had expected to fail spectacularly. Instead, he had done something he'd thought impossible. Not perfectly, not as Rachmaninoff had written it, but real and true and his own. Marcus Whitmore stood at the side of the stage, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. When the applause finally began to die down, he walked to the microphone. The crowd fell silent, waiting to hear what he would say. Marcus Whitmore stood at the microphone for a long moment without speaking. His face was composed, but Andre could see a muscle jumping in his jaw, the only sign of internal turmoil. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, forcing the audience to lean forward to hear. "I need to address several things. First, the technical aspects of what we just heard." Whitmore pulled out his phone and tapped at the screen. "I recorded Andre's performance. I'm going to compare it to the original Rachmaninoff recording." He played 15 seconds of the professional recording, then 15 seconds of Andre's version. Even to untrained ears, the differences were apparent. The original was richer, more complex, with layers of harmony that Andre's single hand couldn't reproduce. But the emotional core, the essential beauty of the melody, was there in both versions. For those who don't have musical training, Whitmore continued, "Let me explain what you just heard. Andre Johnson, who has not touched a piano in 5 years, who has only one functional hand, who heard this piece exactly once, just played back 3 minutes of one of the most difficult compositions in the classical repertoire." He paused. It wasn't note perfect. A professional pianist with 2 hands who'd practiced for months would play it better from a technical standpoint. But what Andre did was still remarkable. He adapted the piece in real time to work with his physical limitations. He made compositional decisions on the fly that most trained musicians wouldn't be able to execute. And he did it all while maintaining the emotional integrity of the original. Whitmore looked directly at Andre. What I just witnessed was not muscle memory or childhood training. It was genuine musical genius, the kind of ability that maybe one person in a million possesses. His voice grew softer. The kind of ability my father spent his whole life wishing he had, and never quite achieved. The audience remained perfectly silent, hanging on every word. My father worked incredibly hard, Whitmore continued. He practiced religiously studied, with the best teachers, devoted his entire youth to becoming a great pianist. And he was good, truly good. But watching Andre tonight, I finally understand what my father never could accept. Being good, even being very good, isn't the same as being touched by something transcendent. He turned to address the crowd. Isaiah Johnson had that transcendent quality, and his son inherited it. No amount of training or practice or privilege could have created what we just heard. It's something you're born with, something in the wiring of your brain, and the sensitivity of your soul that can't be taught or bought. Marcus looked at Andre again, and his expression was complicated. Respect, envy, sadness, acceptance, all mixed together. That's a hard truth for people like me to swallow. We're taught that hard work and dedication can achieve anything, that success is just a matter of effort and opportunity. But it's not true. Some things are gifts, pure and simple. And resenting people for having gifts we lack doesn't diminish their talent. It only diminishes us. He drew a breath. So I'm going to honor my commitment. I will establish the Isaiah Johnson Memorial Scholarship with an initial endowment of $1 million. I will personally fund Zoe Johnson's medical care, all of it, for as long as she needs it. And I will set up a trust to ensure her financial security regardless of what happens to her father. The audience erupted in applause, but Whitmore raised a hand for silence. I'm not finished. There's one more thing I need to do. The thing Andre asked for before he played. He turned to face Andre fully, his posture straightening. Andre Johnson, I apologize, publicly and sincerely. I treated you with cruelty and contempt tonight. I used my power and position to humiliate you for my own amusement and to settle a grudge that had nothing to do with you personally. His voice remained steady, but grew more intense. I dismissed you as just a janitor, as if the work you do has no value. I mocked your disability as if it made you less than fully human. I forced you to perform like a trained animal because I wanted to prove that privilege and training matter more than natural ability. I was wrong. About all of it. Whitmore's jaw tightened. You deserve respect not because of your musical talent, but because you're a human being. Because you work hard to support your daughter, because you face challenges every day that I can't imagine, and you meet them with quiet dignity instead of complaint. Because you're a better man than I am, and that has nothing to do with music. He extended his hand toward Andre. I'm sorry. Truly and deeply sorry. Can you forgive me? The ballroom was absolutely silent. All eyes turned to Andre, waiting to see how he would respond to this unexpected display of contrition. Andre looked at Marcus Whitmore's extended hand. He thought about how this evening had started with champagne staining an expensive suit, about being dragged onto a stage and humiliated in front of hundreds of people, about the fear and shame he'd felt, the desperation to keep his job so he could care for Zoe. But he also thought about what his father had taught him. Music is about connection, little man. It's about finding the shared humanity that exists between people, even when everything else divides them. The best music reminds us that underneath all our differences, we're all just human beings trying to make sense of this complicated world. Andre stood up from the piano bench and walked over to Marcus Whitmore. He looked at the offered hand for a moment, then ignored it, and did something completely unexpected. He hugged Marcus Whitmore, just wrapped his one good arm around the billionaire CEO, and pulled him into a brief, genuine embrace. "I forgive you," Andre said quietly. "Not because you deserve it, but because holding on to anger would hurt me more than it would hurt you. Life's too short and too hard to carry resentment around." When he stepped back, Marcus Whitmore's eyes were wet. He cleared his throat roughly. "Thank you. That's more grace than I had any right to expect." Professor Martinez stepped forward, then a warm smile on her face. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think this evening has become something very different from what any of us expected. We came here for a charity gala, for an evening of food and entertainment and self-congratulation. Instead, we witnessed something far more valuable. We saw cruelty transformed into compassion. We saw talent hidden by circumstances finally recognized and celebrated. We saw two men divided by wealth and privilege and family history find a moment of genuine human connection." She gestured to Andre. "And we were reminded that greatness can be found anywhere. In a janitor working the night shift. In a single father struggling to pay medical bills. In a man who's lost so much but refuses to lose his dignity or his capacity for forgiveness." The applause that followed was different from before. Deeper, more genuine, carrying real emotion instead of mere appreciation for a skilled performance. Catherine Reynolds made her way to the stage, moving with the confident authority of someone accustomed to making things happen. She addressed the crowd. "I want to add my voice to Professor Martinez's words. And I want to make an additional commitment. The Reynolds Foundation will partner with the Whitmore Foundation to expand the Isaiah Johnson Memorial Scholarship. We'll match Marcus's $1 million contribution and work together to identify and support young musicians from underprivileged backgrounds." She turned to Andre. "And young man, I meant what I said earlier. Call my office tomorrow. But more than that, I want to offer you something else. The Reynolds Foundation operates a music therapy program at Children's Hospital. We need someone to lead it, someone who understands music not just as performance, but as healing and connection. The job is yours if you want it." Andre stared at her, struggling to process yet another life-changing offer in a single evening. "You want me to work with children, teaching music. Not just teaching. Using music to help kids cope with illness and trauma." Mrs. Reynolds smiled gently. "I think you're uniquely qualified, given your own experiences with loss and recovery. And the position would pay well enough that you wouldn't need to work 2 jobs anymore. You could actually spend time with your daughter." Andre started, then stopped. His emotions were too big for words. Yes, I'd like that very much." The atmosphere in this ballroom had completely transformed. What had begun as a typical charity gala, then become a spectacle of humiliation, had evolved into something approaching a genuine celebration. People who had come expecting routine speeches and polite applause had instead witnessed real drama, authentic emotion, and a display of talent that most would remember for the rest of their lives. But Marcus Whitmore's face had gone carefully blank. He stood at the microphone, and something in his posture made the crowd quiet down, sensing that the evening wasn't quite over yet. "I meant what I said," Whitmore began, his voice measured. "About the apology, about recognizing Andre's talent, about establishing the scholarship fund. All of that was sincere." He paused, and the pause stretched uncomfortably. "However, I need to clarify something about the other commitment I made." Professor Martinez's expression sharpened with concern. "Marcus, don't do this." Whitmore ignored her, addressing Andre directly. "I said I would fund your daughter's medical care if you successfully played the Rachmaninoff piece. And you did play it, I'll grant you that. But I also need to be honest about what successful means in this context. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing where this might be going. From a purely technical standpoint, Whitmore continued. What you played was not an accurate reproduction of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. There were missing notes, simplified passages, omitted harmonies. An professional pianist would identify numerous errors and departures from the original composition. "You cannot be serious right now," Professor Martinez said, her voice sharp with anger. "You're really going to split hairs about technical perfection after what we just witnessed. I'm being accurate," Whitmore replied coolly. I asked Andre to play back what he heard. He played back an interpretation, an adaptation. That's impressive in its own right, but it's not quite what I specified. The audience erupted in protest. People who moments before had been applauding Marcus's apparent transformation now shouted their disapproval. Even some of his own board members looked disgusted. "This is shameful," Catherine Reynolds called out from the stage. "You made a commitment in front of 300 witnesses. You can't simply redefine the terms after the fact because you're uncomfortable with the outcome." "I'm not redefining anything," Whitmore said, though his voice had lost some of its certainty. "I'm pointing out an objective fact. The performance, while emotionally moving, was not technically accurate to the source material." Andre stood at the piano, feeling the bottom drop out of his world. For a brief, shining moment, he had believed that his daughter would be taken care of, that the constant financial pressure would finally ease. And now it was being snatched away by semantic arguments about what constituted successful playing. "You know what, Whitmore?" A new voice entered the conversation. Rough working class, angry. It came from the back of the room where the custodial staff had gathered. Miguel Andre's fellow janitor stepped forward. His uniform was wrinkled from a long shift, his face lined with exhaustion and life's hardships. But his eyes were fierce. "I don't know anything about fancy music or piano competitions," Miguel said, his voice carrying through the suddenly silent ballroom. "I clean toilets for a living. I barely finished high school. But I know a con when I see one." "You set that man up to fail from the beginning, didn't you? The whole challenge was rigged. How dare you," Whitmore started, but Miguel wasn't finished. "You picked a piece you knew he couldn't possibly play perfectly with one hand. You created conditions that guaranteed failure, then promised him everything he needed most in the world to get him to try anyway. That's not a fair test. That's torture." He gestured angrily toward Andre. "And when he did something incredible anyway, something nobody thought was possible, you're going to weasel out of your promise on a technicality." Other voices joined in, both from the working people in the back and from some of the wealthy guests in the front. The tide of public opinion was turning sharply against Marcus Whitmore, and he could feel it. That man just played a piano piece with one hand after hearing it once a woman's voice called out. "My daughter has been taking lessons for 8 years, and she can barely play chopsticks without making mistakes. What he did was a miracle, and you want to dismiss it because some notes were missing." Whitmore's face had gone pale. He looked around the ballroom at hundreds of angry faces. His attempt to salvage some control over the situation had backfired catastrophically. But pride, that damned Whitmore family pride, kept him from backing down immediately. "I'm not dismissing anything," he said defensively. "I simply think accuracy matters. We can't let emotion override objective evaluation." Objective evaluation. Professor Martinez stepped directly in front of Whitmore, her voice cold with fury. "You want to talk about objectivity? Fine, let's be objective. You invited a world-class pianist to perform at your gala earlier this evening. A conservatory-trained professional with 2 functioning hands who'd practiced that piece for months. I watched her play. It was technically flawless and emotionally sterile. I was bored within 30 seconds. She pointed at Andre. That man with one hand, no preparation, and years away from regular playing created something that made half your audience cry. He adapted a composition in real time while maintaining its emotional core. Do you have any idea how difficult that is? How rare that ability is? But you want to focus on missing notes as if music is just about mechanical reproduction. Before Whitmore could respond, another voice rang out. This one belonged to the retired general who'd spoken earlier. General Morrison stood with military bearing, his medals catching the light. Marcus Whitmore. I served 3 tours in Afghanistan. I've seen men display courage under impossible circumstances. I've watched soldiers adapt to devastating injuries and find ways to continue serving. What I just witnessed from Andre Johnson was that same kind of courage and adaptation under fire. He turned to look directly at Whitmore. And what I'm seeing from you right now is cowardice. You're hiding behind technicalities because you're afraid of what it means if you admit that Andre exceeded your expectations. The general's words carried weight. Multiple people nodded in agreement, and the murmur of approval spread through the crowd. But it was Catherine Reynolds who delivered the final blow. She walked to the microphone and gently but firmly moved Marcus Whitmore aside. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've heard quite enough equivocation for one evening. She turned to Andre with a warm smile. Mr. Johnson, regardless of what Mr. Whitmore decides, I want you to know that the Reynolds Foundation will absolutely cover your daughter's medical expenses and establish a trust for her care. The crowd erupted in applause. Catherine raised a hand for quiet. Furthermore, I'm quite certain that several other people in this room will want to contribute as well. We may not be able to prevent Marcus Whitmore from breaking his word, but we can certainly ensure that his cowardice doesn't harm an innocent child. She looked at Whitmore with undisguised contempt. Marcus, your father's bitterness destroyed him. I watched it happen over years. He was consumed by resentment and died an unhappy man despite all his wealth. And tonight, I'm watching you follow exactly the same path. You had a chance to be better than him, to break the cycle of petty revenge and jealousy. And you're throwing it away. The words hung in the air. Marcus Whitmore stood frozen, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Around him, people who had respected him, done business with him, admired his success, were looking at him with disappointment and disgust. In that moment, standing on his own stage, in his own building, at his own event, Marcus Whitmore was completely alone. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Marcus Whitmore stood at the microphone, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Every face in the ballroom showed some variation of disappointment, anger, or pity. The social capital he'd spent years building was evaporating in real time. He looked at Andre Johnson, who stood quietly by the piano, not gloating, not accusing, just waiting. And in that moment, Marcus saw his father's face. Richard Whitmore, in his final years, bitter and isolated, pushing away anyone who suggested he might need to let go of his old resentments. Your father's curse lives on, he had said to Andre earlier. And suddenly Marcus understood that the curse wasn't about losing a music competition. It was about the inability to move forward, to grow beyond old wounds, to choose grace over grievance. He took a deep breath and returned to the microphone. You're right. All of you. You're absolutely right. His voice was quiet but clear. I was looking for a way out, a technicality that would let me keep my money while maintaining some pretense of honor, because that's what my father would have done. That's what I've been taught to do my whole life. Find the angle. Protect the assets. Win at any cost. He looked at Andre. But you know what, I'm tired of winning like that. I'm tired of being my father's son in all the worst ways. He straightened his shoulders. Andre Johnson played magnificently tonight. Not perfectly, but magnificently. He did something I couldn't do, something 99% of trained pianists couldn't do. And he did it with grace and dignity, despite being put in an impossible situation. Marcus pulled out his phone and began typing. "I'm transferring funds right now. $1 million to establish the Isaiah Johnson Memorial Scholarship, another $1 million into a trust for Zoe Johnson's medical care and future needs, and a personal check for $50,000 to Andre himself for pain and suffering caused by my behavior tonight." The crowd remained silent, watching this unexpected reversal. Marcus looked up from his phone. "Done. You'll all receive confirmation emails within the hour showing that these transfers have been completed. No backing out, no technicalities, no escape clauses." He walked over to Andre and extended his hand again. "I apologized earlier for how I treated you. Now I want to apologize for trying to weasel out of my commitments, for looking for reasons not to keep my word, for being, as General Morrison so accurately put it, a coward." Andre studied Marcus's face for a long moment, searching for sincerity. What he saw was exhaustion, and something that might have been the first stirrings of self-awareness. He shook Marcus's hand. "Thank you. For my daughter's sake, thank you." The audience applauded, but it was muted, uncertain. They'd been on an emotional roller coaster all evening and weren't sure if this was the real ending or just another twist. Professor Martinez approached both men. "Marcus, I'm glad you found your way to the right decision, but I want you to understand something." She spoke gently but firmly. "What happened tonight, the scholarship, the medical trust, these things are good, but they don't erase your behavior. You still used your power to humiliate someone for entertainment. You still have work to do on yourself." "I know," Marcus said simply, "and I don't expect anyone to forget or forgive easily. I just hope that maybe I can start making different choices. Be a different person than my father was." Catherine Reynolds joined them on stage. "Marcus, the Reynolds Foundation would be happy to partner with you on the scholarship program. But I have conditions. You'll establish an independent board to oversee the fund. You won't have sole control over which students receive scholarships. And you'll personally meet with every scholarship recipient to hear their stories." She smiled slightly. "I think it would be good for you to spend time with talented young people who don't have privilege to understand their struggles and their potential." Marcus nodded. "Agreed. All of it." He looked exhausted, but somehow lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. "Is there anything else?" "Yes." Mrs. Reynolds gestured to the crowd. "I think you owe everyone here an explanation for why this gala turned into what it turned into. These people came to support charity, not to witness a public therapy session." Marcus actually laughed at that, a short bark of genuine amusement. "You're not wrong." He returned to the microphone one final time. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience tonight. This was not the evening I planned. I intended a simple charity event where wealthy people could feel good about themselves while networking and enjoying expensive food." He paused. "Instead, you got to watch me work through decades of family baggage in real time. You witnessed me at my absolute worst and saw me confronted with truths I've spent my whole life avoiding. For that, I apologize." He gestured to Andre. "But you also got to witness something extraordinary. Real talent, real courage, real grace. I hope that made the drama worthwhile." The applause this time was warmer, more genuine. People were willing to accept Marcus's contrition, even if they remained wary of his motivations. Over the next hour, the gala slowly wound down. Guests approached Andre to offer congratulations and support. Several business owners handed him cards offering jobs or opportunities. A music teacher from a prestigious private school asked if he'd consider giving a master class to her students. A documentary filmmaker wanted to tell his story. Miguel and the other custodial staff surrounded Andre, clapping him on the back and celebrating. "You showed them," Miguel said, grinning. "Showed all of them that we are not invisible." Professor Martinez made plans to help Andre navigate his new opportunities. Catherine Reynolds' assistant collected Andre's contact information and scheduled a meeting for the following week. Everything was moving so fast that Andre felt dizzy. Finally, as the crowd thinned, Andre found himself alone at the piano one more time. He sat down on the bench and placed his right hand on the keys, playing a few soft notes. The instrument responded with its perfect tone, rich and resonant. He thought about his father, about Sarah, about Zoe sleeping at home with his mother, watching over her. He thought about how this evening had started with humiliation and ended with hope. About how the worst moment of his recent life had somehow transformed into possibility. Life was strange that way. You couldn't predict what would break you or what would save you. You just had to keep going, keep trying, keep finding reasons to put one foot in front of the other. Andre played a simple melody, one of the lullabies he used to play for Zoe when she was a baby. It felt like a prayer of thanksgiving, an acknowledgement that despite everything, despite all the loss and pain and struggle, he was still here. Still capable of creating beauty. Still worthy of love and respect. Tomorrow he would start figuring out how to manage all these new opportunities. He would meet with Mrs. Reynolds and Professor Martinez. He would schedule Zoe's surgery. He would begin the music therapy training. His life was about to change in ways he couldn't fully imagine yet. But tonight, right now, all he wanted to do was play. To let music flow through him one more time, to feel connected to his father and his past, and the person he'd been before life had taken so much away. The ballroom was nearly empty now, just a few staff members cleaning up their movements, quiet and efficient. But they stopped their work to listen as Andre played, drawn by the beauty of the simple melody. And in that moment, in an ornate ballroom, in a tower owned by billionaires with champagne stains on the marble floor and the echo of difficult truths still hanging in the air, Andre Johnson was no longer invisible. He was seen. He was heard. He was valued. He was finally home. 3 months later, Andre sat at a different piano in a very different setting. The music therapy room at Children's Hospital was painted in cheerful colors with windows that let in afternoon sunlight. Instruments of all kinds lined the walls, drums and guitars and xylophones, tools for helping sick children find moments of joy and expression in difficult circumstances. Zoe sat beside him on the piano bench, her small hands resting on the keys. The surgery had been a complete success. Her color was better, her energy was returning, and for the first time in her life, she could run and play without her heart struggling to keep up. "Okay, Daddy, show me again," Zoe said, her voice bright with enthusiasm. Andre guided her fingers to the correct positions. "Remember, it's not about pressing hard. It's about listening to what the keys want to tell you. Every note has a story." Zoe played the simple scale he'd taught her, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. When she finished, she looked up at him with shining eyes. "Did I do good?" "You did wonderful, sweetheart." Andre kissed the top of her head. "You're a natural just like your grandpa. Tell me again about Grandpa Isaiah," Zoe requested. She never tired of hearing stories about the grandfather she'd never known. As Andre began telling her about his father's music, the therapy room door opened. A young girl in a hospital gown wheeled herself in, her mother pushing the wheelchair. The girl's name was Maya, and she'd been coming to music therapy for 2 weeks, working through anxiety about her upcoming bone marrow transplant. "Hey, Maya," Andre called out warmly. "Ready for our session?" The girl nodded shyly. Can we work on that song again? The one about flying absolutely. Andre turned to Zoe. Sweetheart, can you practice your scales while I work with Maya? I'll come check on you in a few minutes. Zoe nodded importantly, already turning back to the keys. Andre wheeled Maya's chair to a different corner of the room, where a keyboard was set up at wheelchair-accessible height. Over the next 30 minutes, Andre worked with Maya on a simple composition they were creating together about a bird learning to fly. Music therapy wasn't about technical perfection. It was about giving children a way to express feelings they couldn't put into words, about helping them feel some measure of control in situations where they had none, about creating beauty in the midst of pain. Andre had found his calling. Every day he came to the hospital and worked with kids facing terrifying diagnoses. He helped them write songs about their fears and their hopes. He taught them to play instruments adapted for their various limitations. He created moments of joy and normalcy in an environment defined by sickness and struggle. The Reynolds Foundation job paid well enough that he'd been able to rent a small house for himself, Zoe, and his mother. They had a yard where Zoe could play. They had security and stability and hope for the future. The trust fund Mrs. Reynolds had established meant that even if something happened to Andre, Zoe would be taken care of. As his session with Maya ended and her mother thanked him tearfully for helping her daughter smile again, Andre's phone buzzed with a text from Professor Martinez. The Isaiah Johnson Memorial Scholarship had selected its first 5 recipients, and there was going to be a ceremony next month. Would Andre come speak? He texted back, yes, immediately, sharing his father's legacy helping young musicians get opportunities that had been denied to him felt like the perfect way to honor Isaiah's memory. The door opened again, and this time it was Marcus Whitmore who entered. He'd been coming by the hospital once a week for the past month, part of his agreement with Catherine Reynolds. He sat in on therapy sessions, met with sick children and their families, wrote checks when medical bills threatened to overwhelm families financially. Andre had been skeptical at first, wondering if Whitmore's change of heart was genuine or just another performance. But over weeks of interaction, he'd seen something shift in the billionaire. Marcus was quieter now, less arrogant. He listened more than he talked. He seemed genuinely moved by the stories he heard at the hospital. "How's it going today?" Marcus asked, his voice soft, so as not to disturb Zoe's practicing. "Good." Andre gestured to where Maya was leaving with her mother. "That's the girl I told you about last week. The transplant is scheduled for next month. How's she doing emotionally? Scared. But writing music about it helps her process some of the fear." Andre studied Marcus's face. "You look tired. Long night." Whitmore sat down heavily in one of the child-sized chairs, looking absurd but not seeming to care. "I've been going through my father's papers, his old journals and letters, trying to understand him better." "What did you find?" "That he was deeply unhappy for most of his life." Marcus's voice was sad. All that wealth and success, and he spent his final years fixating on a music competition he'd lost 35 years earlier. What a waste. He looked at Andre. "I don't want to end up like that, bitter and isolated, measuring my worth by victories over other people. So I'm trying to figure out what actually matters, what I want my legacy to be." And Andre prompted. "I don't know yet." Marcus smiled slightly. "But spending time here helps. Seeing these kids fight so hard, seeing their families hold on to hope in impossible situations. It puts my problems in perspective, makes my father's resentment seem incredibly petty." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching Zoe play. She was singing to herself as her fingers moved across the keys, making up words to go with the notes. "She's talented," Marcus observed. "She is." Andre's voice was soft with pride. "But more importantly, she's happy. That's what I care about most." The piano playing stopped, and Zoe looked over at them. "Daddy, can Mr. Marcus hear the song I wrote?" "Of course, sweetheart. Come show us." Zoe launched into an enthusiastic, if somewhat chaotic, composition about butterflies and sunshine and her new backyard. It was simple and childish and absolutely perfect. When she finished, both men applauded. "That was beautiful," Zoe Marcus said, sincerely. "You're a wonderful musician." Zoe beamed. "Daddy says music is for everyone. That you don't have to be the best, you just have to mean it. Your daddy is a wise man." Marcus caught Andre's eye and smiled. Much wiser than I was for a long time. As the afternoon wore on and more children came for their therapy sessions, Marcus stayed to observe and occasionally help. He was learning Andre thought, slowly but genuinely changing. Whether it would last, whether Marcus Whitmore would truly become a better man than his father had been, remained to be seen. But the effort was there, and that counted for something. At the end of the day, as Andre packed up to take Zoe home, he paused at the doorway and looked back at the music therapy room. It was such a simple space, really. Just a room with some instruments and windows. But it had become a place of healing and hope where sick children could forget their pain for a little while and just be kids making music. This was his father's legacy, Andre realized. Not fame or recognition or winning competitions, but the gift of music shared freely with anyone who needed it. The ability to create beauty and connection and meaning through sound. That was what Isaiah Johnson had valued, and it was what Andre valued now, too. "Ready to go home, sweetheart?" he asked Zoe. "Ready." She grabbed her backpack and took his hand. "Can we have spaghetti for dinner?" "Absolutely. Grandma's making your favorite." They walked out of the hospital together, father and daughter heading home to their little house with the yard and the piano in the living room, and the promise of tomorrow. Behind them, the city lights were coming on as evening fell, thousands of windows glowing in the gathering dark. Somewhere in that vast urban landscape, other stories were unfolding. Other struggles and triumphs. Other people discovering hidden strengths or confronting difficult truths. The world kept turning indifferent to individual dramas, and yet somehow those individual dramas were everything. They were what made life meaningful. Andre thought about that night 3 months ago in the Whitmore Tower ballroom. About being forced onto a stage, about playing piano with one hand, about turning humiliation into vindication. It felt almost like a dream, now something that had happened to someone else. But it had been real, and it had changed everything. Not because of the money or the opportunities, though those mattered, but because for the first time in 5 years, Andre had reconnected with the part of himself he'd thought was lost forever. The part that could create beauty despite brokenness. The part that his father had nurtured so carefully all those years ago. As they reached their car, Zoe looked up at him with serious eyes. "Daddy, are you happy now?" Andre lifted her into her car seat and buckled her in carefully. "You know what baby girl I think I am. Not because everything's perfect, but because I remember who I am now. Does that make sense?" Zoe considered this with the gravity only an 8-year-old could manage. "I think so. You're Daddy, and you play piano, and you help kids at the hospital, and you love me." Andre laughed, feeling tears prick at his eyes. "Yes, exactly that. All of that." He kissed her forehead. "And I do love you, more than anything in the whole world. I love you too, Daddy." They drove home through the city streets as the last light faded from the sky. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys. There would be therapy sessions and scholarship ceremonies, and the ongoing work of healing and growing, and building a life worth living. But tonight, there would be spaghetti and bedtime stories, and Zoe's laughter filling their little house. And maybe after Zoe was asleep, Andre would sit down at the piano and play for a while. Not because anyone was listening, not to prove anything or achieve anything, just to let the music flow through him to feel connected to his father and his past, and the gift that had waited patiently all these years for him to reclaim it. Because that's what talent was, he understood now. Not something that demanded to be recognized or rewarded, just something that existed quiet and patient, waiting for the moment when you were ready to embrace it again. Waiting for the moment when you realized that you were enough exactly as you were broken and whole at the same time. The piano could wait. His daughter needed dinner. His mother would want to hear about his day. Life would keep moving forward in its messy, complicated, beautiful way. And somewhere in the night, in a hospital room, where a child struggled with fear about tomorrow's treatment, or in a music school, where a scholarship student practiced scales with determined focus, or in a tower office where a billionaire sat alone wondering who he wanted to be, the echoes of that night 3 months ago continued to ripple outward, changing things in ways both large and small. One moment of truth. One performance given with courage and grace. One decision to respond to cruelty with dignity instead of matching bitterness with bitterness. That was enough. It had to be enough. And somehow, miraculously, it was.